Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Shane Prada. I'm the director here at the Baltimore Jewelry Center. It's so wonderful to have a crowd of folks in-house, in person, and a group online coming from all over. That's exciting. So thanks for joining us. Um, the Baltimore Jewelry Center, for those of you who don't know, is located in Baltimore, and we offer classes and workshops and studio access, as well as an exhibitions program and a residency program, which is what tonight is all about. I'm going to give a very short introduction and then turn it over to Meg. Megan Kerr is a metalsmith, contemporary jeweler, and artist from upstate New York. Meg creates sculpture and jewelry that disassemble familiar and intimate forms to portray vulnerability, impermanence, and repair. Meg studies the intimate identity that remains within objects that have been closely related to our bodies, garments, and utilitarian accessories. Meg is especially interested in objects that bridge life and death. Her works lead the viewer to consider utility and mending as a form of empowerment within healing through grief. Meg received a BFA in metal from SUNY New Paltz in December 2023. She was selected to be featured in the BJC's inaugural graduate show last summer, and in that show, she was awarded the Best in Show designation. The prize for that was a 1-month residency in our studio, hence her residency this April. Meg has furthered her professional development as a resident at the Vermont Studio Center and Touchstone Center for Craft. In 2024, in 2024, her Vermont Studio Center residency was focusing on sculpture. This fall, she'll begin pursuing her MFA at the Cranbrook Academy of Art. During Meg's residency, she made pieces that accompany the work that she submitted to her graduate show. So for those of you who saw the work in the show, some of the pieces today might feel familiar. These pieces play off of textiles and accessories like a belt buckle. She also utilized vintage buttons from her collection to make a few production pieces, as well as a few small sculptures. It was lovely to have Meg with us this April. She was a diligent maker and a joyful presence in our space. We will miss her, but we can't wait to see what she does next.
Hello, everyone. All right. So my first slide here is a picture of me at the Baltimore Jewelry Center graduate exhibition that Shane was discussing. I'm lucky enough to have spent the past month here. And I was put into the show among both undergrad and graduate work that I admire so much. So it was really a privilege to be able to collaborate with the other artists in that show. And being here has shown me what a vibrant and special community lives within the city. And it's been very influential and impactful for me to know that the BJC creates space for young professionals to continue to grow at such early points in their career. There's a lot of pressure on young artists post-grad to immediately define a direction when they're still trying to figure out kind of what their place is within the field. So thank you for trusting me and giving me the space to be able to create what I wanted and pursue what I love. So I'm currently located in the Finger Lakes. And in my studio practice, I work alone. So it's been really nice to be here and bounce my ideas off of the other people in the studio and see progress from my peers. And that's been really inspiring. So I have background experience in a range of work. So from fabrication and working with a blacksmith, Sam Kastner, to working in more fine production jewelry for an artist based out of Kingston, New York. And this varying backgrounds is pretty necessary for me in my practice, as I often layer a lot of different processes. So being able to have that background makes it necessary for me to conceptualize and bring any idea to life. So on the left here was the very first project that I ever created in metal. And it's really important for me to share this piece because it's kind of like where everything started for me. I originally started my college career at Kutztown University, where I was majoring in art education. But after taking just one metal class, something really clicked for me and resonated with me in a way that nothing had before. So I knew it was immediately the field that I wanted to dedicate myself to, but at the same time, there was a huge setback because they were cutting the funding to my program that I was a part of. So there was only just a small group of us that kind of had to figure out our next steps. But my professor at Kutztown, Sophia Park, who is a graduate of San Diego State University, She was an enormous support for me as I transitioned to New Paltz. And there was a lot of technical skills that I needed to catch up on once I was at New Paltz. And I really feel like that has that trajectory has just kept going and inspired me even more as I continued. So on the right side here, you'll see a piece that I think of as a breakthrough piece. It's a small handheld locket, very intimate in scale. And inside is a memorial element, a small locket of hair. And this was the first time I started to really engage with the ideas of memory in this public and private intimacy. So there's this distinctive tension of what's visible and not visible, so open versus closed. And to me, it gave me the confidence to really trust my instincts in the studio, as well as open the doors to the themes that I still carry on today. So I'll start by discussing the first body of work that I created, which is titled Processing for my BFA thesis show. So a lot of the different themes that I work with is connection, weight, materiality, public versus private connections, impermanence, and vulnerability. In my practice, I often repurpose worn textiles and garments that have recorded the body's movement and memory, and then either pair them with metal or capture moments of vulnerability within the garments and translate into metal itself. So there's a big distinction between the soft and hard materials kind of in conversation with each other. Material choice becomes not just a vehicle for form, but an extension of the emotional landscape that I'm constructing. So the materials began to absorb these feelings of emotional turmoil as I deconstructed them. So I began to study the idea of a safety pin and how its intended function is to hold two pieces of fabric together. So I wanted to target what happens when the strength of functionality is lacking and can no longer have the strength to hold the two parts together. So I created this pin a day series where I would go into the studio every day and create a different pin. And this began to be a really grounding experience for me and challenged me in a new way before I continued on with my day. And I think it's really important to show some of my influences within my research. So Arlene Fish's book, Textile Techniques in Metal, was a very big inspiration as I started to push the boundaries of hard materials and how they can move to form fabric-like structures. And then both artists here on the right have chosen materials precisely for their fragility and their tendency to sag, collapse, and decay over time. And that appears in both the sculpture and jewelry format. So both Hesse's and Brugger's practices, and what I'm both drawn to as well, is the acknowledgement that material is never neutral and that it records touch, pressure, and time. So Kit, one of the pieces that was shown in the graduate exhibition, is a full kit of necessary needles and tools used when repairing and removing the stitch. So the box is presented open and invites the hand, kind of the same way that jewelry acts. And it shows our natural impulse to mend as it's opened. So I try to make my work be approachable and relatable within these symbols that we often encounter in our everyday life. They each have a story to us and our unique experiences. So my goal is to transform these utilitarian objects into what seem like charged relics, and to consider this mending as a form of healing and memory. So here we have, and actually the next two slides are going to be necklaces based on the idea of the whole. So I really use metal as a technique to frame a moment in time. And the Webster Dictionary states that the idea of a whole is a hollow and unpleasant place. I oftentimes in my practice when trying to identify how to approach a piece will Google the definition of the emotion that I'm feeling. And within the definitions, we'll find keywords that resonate with me in a unique way, and might spark an idea for a piece or help me troubleshoot in a unique way. So I wanted to capture the unpleasant moment of the whole by making a frame for it. So I create these forms of sterling silver with these staple-like prongs to hold the fabric in place. And the fragments begin to tear and droop around the whole as a symbol of time. So throughout history, the ripping of skin, the cutting of hair, and the destruction of clothing have been used as an expression to work through themes of sorrow. So these fragments are captured throughout history, and it's interesting to kind of rework these fragments back together because they'll never go back to the exact form that they were in their original state. So a lot of my work is trying to capture this idea of weight and the sense of a rupture. So creating a physical form that feels like it's on the verge of tearing apart. Normally, I problem solve very intuitively as I work, and I rarely start with sketches or really much planning at all. And if I do, they're usually always three-dimensional. So drawing on paper has always been extremely challenging for me. But with this piece, I really forced myself to kind of slow down and observe more carefully the garments that I was taking apart. So I studied the movement of the threads as they tore, and this kind of very obvious yet invisible tension that was created. So I sketched those gestures onto thin copper sheet, and then I poured injection wax over the top, and I was able to heat them up, form them, electroform them, and then fabricate with them to create the overall piece. So every stage of creating this was really paying attention to the fractures. So I think it's really interesting for me to revisit work in a new way after some time's passed. So these two pieces were completed over a year apart from each other. And I'm really drawn to the pull and release that's created between two people and how proximity between the two can imply one over the other. The sense of loss expressed in this tension is meant to contrast the connectedness of being bonded to one another. So revisiting a piece for me doesn't mean recreating it, but in a new way means confronting the evolution of the idea and acknowledging that it's okay for things to change over time. So this zipper brooch is a fabricated brooch with a sand cast zipper tab, which is carved from hard wax. And this piece was another kind of turning point for me in my practice as I began to examine more subtle ways to show this weight and the overall kind of just exhaustion within the material. I like to challenge the word's meaning, so leaving it ambiguous for the viewer to describe how they want to interpret my pieces when I go to title them. So this means confronting so the piece being unfastened yet fastened simultaneously. So the locket for me is an embodiment of tension and this idea of public and private connection. So especially within the themes of healing and remembrance, particularly the way that strands of hair were intricately collected, preserved, and honored. There's something profoundly moving about that attention to small remnants of the body. And in my own studio practice, I tend to work among the large piles of scrap material. I noticed that some part of me instinctively grouped together these little bits of threads that I had removed from the seams. And I noticed that in a formal way, in a yet fragile way as well, it kind of resembled this idea of hair. So I wanted to honor those threads in the same kind of way. The idea of collection carries through into some of my later works. So especially as I continue to challenge the idea of what containment can mean. In my studio, I often find myself collecting not just items of clothing, but also the fasteners that come with them. So the small overlooked mechanisms that give garments their structure and function. Some of these buttons I used here were gifted to me by my grandmother. And collecting has always kind of been a part of who I am. even as a little girl, I loved collecting things like rocks, and I even collect pens at one point. And at the time, they seemed kind of like random objects, yet they were really meaningful to me. And over time, the items that I've collected changed, but the instinct really remained the same. So there's kind of a control when collecting that I want to examine, in a way of holding on to the fragments of our experiences or our identity. It also raises the question for me about what abundance really means in my practice, and is abundance the endless gathering of things, or is it the act of giving them purpose and a place to really belong? And examine the more subtle ways too. So the hook and eye is one of the most humble fasteners, in my opinion, designed to join these two parts together, and it almost has this invisibility associated with it. Bringing forth these concealed gestures embody this push-pull sensation, that subtle tension between the two forms. This ambiguity is important because it mirrors the internal conflict between us off, and then opening myself up to confrontation. And in many ways, this work has helped me process through this. Okay. Yeah, we are having internet issues, but hopefully it'll be good now. So I do think that with this piece specifically, the hook and eye is a very humble fastener, and this leads the viewer to consider if they want the elements to come together or pull apart from each other. So over time, I started to look at the parts of the garment in a more refined viewpoint, instead of kind of the larger scale garment as a whole. But even these kind of moments in time are drawn from an original piece or garment that I've collected over time. And a lot of these themes have continued throughout the month that I've been here as well. So you'll see some of the themes kind of carried through, and this kind of performative way of making in the past month. So yeah, we can transition over into the hallway. Great.
Okay.
All right.
That's what you got.
Sweet. So there isn't a title for all of these groupings of objects, but this first piece, I really wanted to test what the rupture means. So focusing on the fragility that the garment brings. So as I was actually making the belt buckle brooch, I started to use roller print texture to create this leather-like structure on the belt. And as I started to do that, the garment itself started to fall apart bit by bit. And I was really kind of curious at how I changed pressures, how much of that rupture and tension would occur within the fabric. So sometimes it would completely decay and fall apart. And then other times it would be just really kind of subtle impressions. And I would be kind of curious to see how I could control that. So I wanted to create these layers. And if you saw the garment too, as kind of this very rectangular overall form. And so I really wanted to do the justice of its original form and translate that into a wearable necklace, and incorporating these layers of ruptured metal. So I had poured an ingot, a silver ingot with Elliott, and as I was manipulating the material, I noticed that I could kind of control the rupture and when it occurred, and how deep it sort of went into the material. Some I intentionally cracked or cut, and then sometimes completely unexpected things would happen. And I kind of wanted to dive more into that vulnerability. So yeah, like I said, I was kind of curious about subtle weight in my work too. So I do feel like this belt buckle brooch is an extension of my zipper brooch in a way. So noticing how kind of the weight of time is taking over. And I titled this one buckling, so you don't really know if it means buckling under the pressure or buckling and coming together for the two parts. So I had so much fun titling that. But yeah, focusing on both the wearables and also experimenting with what objects mean as well. So I noticed that I had little fragmented pieces of work that kind of were being ignored on my bench. And I wanted to showcase them in the same way that I saw the buttons were originally. So all of these pieces over time were like little fractions of pressure again. And I wanted to kind of create a new frame for them to be appreciated, not in a negative way, but in almost a positive, like reincarnated way of their original life, even though they're only fragments of their original pieces. So really the only thing that I contributed and fabricated is the needle up at the top left corner there. And
Oh, you fabricated that.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's not a found object. But yeah, so it was interesting for me to kind of put this pin next to some of the internal contents of the buttons itself that I started to cut. And that's kind of what the fragments were that were an extension of these three. And those are all the outside edges of buttons. And in my practice right now at home, I really don't like give myself the permission to just like explore materials. I stay pretty structured in there and doesn't let my mind kind of explore more. So it was really interesting for me to kind of have the space to explore the materials in a new way. So I had noticed this really satisfying outside edge of these buttons. So I would cut out the inside, sand them down, and then everything is cold connected as well. So also focusing on the button and movement. This button, you know, it's naturally meant to have that movement. So I kind of wanted to keep part of that intact and have the little elements moving at the bottom there. So this is the first time I've really been super excited to bridge more conceptual work with more production, like functional wearable works. So I'm really excited to explore that more when I leave this fall. Yeah.
There's a couple questions. Folks can ask questions about Margot online. It's a question. It was such a pleasure getting to know you and see your lovely work come together this month. What does it mean when these functional connections are frozen or rendered inoperable, i.e. the buckle soldered together or the buttons with their holes cut out?
I think that it kind of leaves this idea of like containment or vulnerability like ambiguous for me, because sometimes I come into like my studio and I view the weight of like manipulating the material as kind of like a burden, and I don't want to confront it at all, and other times I do. So I think it's kind of interesting to create these fragments because I get to kind of decide what parts I want to focus on when I do come into the studio. But there is like part of the belt buckle is soldered in place, and then when you take it off the mount, it does have some movement in the center there. So I think it's interesting to kind of also play around with the contrast of the hard and soft material and kind of like how I can push the boundaries of that. And yeah, I think it really resonates with me in a different way each time. Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a related question.
Mm-hmm.
In the work that you have here and the work that you had in the graduate show, you kind of honed in on like the sewing notion or the fastener as like a utilitarian component of a garment. I'm wondering how you think about the translation of that utilitarian component into the format of jewelry as something that is almost entirely decorative.
Right. I mean, I think that jewelry naturally has this like intimacy because it's so close to the body and interacts with the body in a way, like I don't think that jewelry always needs to be kind of this functional meaning behind it. You know, when I created the kit and it was inviting the hand, like I could have very well had it closed as well, but I wanted to also have it kind of imply jewelry. You know, you bring it close to the body and use it for a garment usually that's close to the body. And I think of the garment as like another layer of skin. It's an extension of us and our identity. So in a way, those two naturally kind of combined for me and become this kind of utilitarian jewelry kind of hybrid. You know, they aren't completely separate in my mind. And I still think that it relates to what I've done in the past month here. And I didn't focus as much on the tool aspect as much as kind of the sensation of what the rupture actually means before the mending occurs. So kind of taking a few steps back before I was kind of really focused on the healing part of it and bringing it back together, where I'm wanting to really kind of examine now what the root cause of everything is and where that rupture kind of starts and goes out from there.
I think it's refreshing too to just focus on the rupture and not to just jump to the solution, right? Because that's I think especially kind of as Westerners, and especially in contemporary America, there's very much just like problem solution. And so it's just like, what if we just pause and
totally. And I think that like part of my feelings of sorrow when I started to create my first body of work were very fresh. So I was so focused on like the idea of processing, where now I feel like because I'm looking at my work in a more refined way, I have kind of processed it. And for the good or bad, you know, I have processed it. So now I feel like I can take a few steps back and really kind of evaluate what's the cause of it and what got me here. So
I like too that in this moment where I feel like fine art is taking a closer look at fiber art, this idea of making work that's like what's overlooked often in fiber art, especially in garments, and just like giving these objects that are so important to the items that they're a part of a little bit of their due.
Totally. I mean, and there are plenty of parts in history where like the use of certain fabrics was pretty like radical, you know, and because it really, you know, we pick our garments for their texture or sensory or the forms of our identity, and using it in art wasn't always accepted in kind of the way that it is now. So I want to challenge that and create layers to that as much as possible. So
I have a little bit of a technical question. So when you're pouring your ingots for your rupturing pieces, were you like, was your initial goal to make like a perfect ingot, or were you intentionally putting faults into it to create those ruptures?
well, no. So I had originally poured it and I had cut off like a specific bottom half of it that I wanted to kind of leave for the rupture. And I had noticed a small crack, you know, as I started to manipulate it. And very well, like I could have filed it out and made sure that it didn't get any worse. But instead I was like so curious to see how I could kind of push the boundary of that a little bit. So I just decided to cut off the bottom part of it and then leave the top half to be like perfect sheet, which I did continue to fabricate with, but then the bottom half kind of stayed in this territory. So it was cool to see kind of the perfect versus imperfect as well.
Yeah.
Just I really like the material used in here with the textile, because like watching these, I have a sense of like the metal it's kind of supposed to like pieces things together, but because of how hard compared to fabric is, almost it's like hurting the body. So like very bodily looking at how the metal as like a clothing, but a big part of like removing and harming the
Yeah.
material is really interesting.
Yeah, and that's interesting you say that too, because this piece by Lola Brooks comes to mind. She created this chatelaine that has this element of a pin cushion in it, but the pins are facing outward, so that when you have this object that's used for its functionality and to be worn on the body, it actually hurts the body when you interact with it. And I think that that was kind of a key part of my research too, bridging this idea of function and hurt, but then also like soft and mending. And so yeah, that was the first piece that came to mind.
Nellie Pumas, this beautiful work, Megan, very special and unique way to view items that quietly work so hard keeping fabric together. I like that. My favorite is the hook and eye. Beautiful, simple, yet strong.
Thanks, Nellie.
Another question.
It's your last one.
Not that question. Different question first. How much of a role do you think empathy plays in your relationship with materials when you work?
I think a lot of it, which is ironic because I have like a lot of empathy towards like the materials and what they bring. Yet sometimes I neglect to have like empathy for myself, which is interesting.
Great. Wow.
So like I'll work for these materials and I'll have so much empathy towards like the story that they've told. Like oftentimes I'll, have garments from people I know or people I don't know. And sometimes like because it's so close to the body, I start to create this empathy about the narrative that the garment holds without me even knowing the person. Yeah, I start to exhaust all of these emotions within myself, and I've already put all my empathy over there when a little bit needs to stay here as well. So I think that it plays a pretty big role, but I'm still kind of figuring out ways to navigate that and like direct it where I need it, I guess. So hopefully I'll get there one day.
Well, we really liked getting to know you and seeing your work.
Time for the last
It's time for the last question. What's your question, Jay?
Hey, Megan, did you know that people can support programs like our annual graduate exhibition and our residency by donating to the Baltimore Jewelry Center?
Yes.
Jay's so good at this. You should donate just because Jay's so good at this. I did drop the link in the chat. I know there's some new folks here, so
If you're watching this on YouTube, BaltimoreJewelryCenter.org/donate.
we will still need money in that future time. Yeah. So much of our programming here is either free or drastically reduced cost to everyone who takes part. So donations go a really long way. And as Jay pointed out, they are the primary funders of our residency and our exhibitions program. So support if you can. If you have questions about the residency program, let us know, or questions about any of the things that we do. We will have Meg's work up for a couple of weeks, so come take a look at it and make sure that you follow her if you weren't already, and follow us. Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Good job.